All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I think I'm not sure who wants to go first with an update on Point Melade first, maybe Virginia?
Sure, happy to. Sorry about any background noise. So folks who listened to the presentation about Point Melade and who came with us on the tour will know that this is a campaign that's taking place in several arenas. There's the political arena, there's also a legal fight going on as well. And there are several lawsuits around the development of excuse me, bedtime. There are several lawsuits around the development at Point Melade, and we had a legal victory in one of them last week, which so part of the when the city awarded the developers rights to build at this site, it was part of a settlement agreement over a formerly proposed casino at the site, which had been a lot of backstory. But when they awarded this this development agreement, it was done in the settlement, which led to the development agreement, was done behind closed doors and in violation of the Brown Act, which requires public participation in certain areas of public policy. This one included. So the Sierra Club and other groups have sued over that, and sued the city, and there are a couple other defendants, which include the folks involved in that original settlement agreement that led to the development. Sorry, it's very complicated, but the victory is that last week the Richmond City Council had on its closed session agenda the decision as to what arguments to file in its response brief to the opening brief that we had filed in the lawsuit. And the city attorney was all prepared to file a brief arguing that, you know, to defend the city and say they hadn't violated the Brown Act. However, because of, you know, a lot of work that's gone on in the city of Richmond to get a great progressive majority on the city council, we have a fantastic city council majority right now that supports preserving Point Melade. And they, in the city council, instructed the city attorney to file a brief that admits that the city violated the Brown Act in approving the settlement deal that allowed the development agreement to go forward. And the brief will have to admit that the city also violated California planning law. So the city is basically agreeing with this lawsuit against it and not defending its own actions. If we win this case, it will mean that the settlement is voided and thus the development agreement, and we have more time to save Point Melade. So this is just one more step in a long campaign, but it's a really exciting one and a good one.
All right, thank you, Virginia. I think we were going to do an update also on East Palo Alto.
Yes, yes, we are, Susan, and I will do that. Okay, so many of you, I hope, recall when we talked about it earlier, the East Palo Alto situation is about trying to influence the Ravenswood Business Park specific plan update, as such as we want to protect the shoreline, and we want to prevent some significant environmental impacts on the city that would occur if the extensive development that has been proposed would go forward. So on that project, and this is one where we don't have any lawsuits or sudden decisions here, I think the best news we have is that we have, it seems like the next planning meetings that will be discussed, and one that was at the city council that would have been looking toward a decision, it looks like those may be postponed, that that questions asked by the city council last time may have produced the need for the staff to take more time to do more research. One of the big questions was on traffic. And so this gives us time also to help the community be able to be more ready to come forward. In this period of time, we have been working more with the community and trying to help them organize so that more people are showing up at meetings with better information, and that there is a broader, stronger response to the city council from the community itself. We have not ourselves put forward any letters right now, which we could, because we're trying to feel out what is most important to the community so that we stay in line with supporting them as much as possible. It wouldn't in the future keep us from, say, responding to an EIR with a full breadth of what we think is appropriate to that response. But for the time being, we're trying to work with the community. Another thing that occurred, we had previously a lot of the environmental folks had met with Harvest Properties, and recently a few of us got to meet with representatives of Emerson Properties. And if you remember, the pictures are on the tour. Harvest Properties were the property that was on the more southerly side next to the Bay Trail. The Emerson property was the one that was set back from the Bay Trail across the inner marsh. So we were invited to meet on their property back there, but unfortunately they did not provide any opportunity to explore the site. So I had hoped to be able to look more closely at where their property touches the marsh, but we couldn't get anywhere near there. And in fact, which we could see from the Bay Trail, there's this huge pile of, stockpile of dirt. And I'm curious as to what their intention is with that dirt, but we couldn't get near it. We had some interesting discussions. Emerson Collective is a foundation, so they are a beneficial foundation. So they're looking to create more services to underprivileged people, such as in East Palo Alto. But they told us that it was the city that approached them to put together, acquire the lands that on which their project is based. And then they since have, of course, put together this proposed development. So they're moving forward more like a developer. And they honestly acted like they don't know who's going to occupy those buildings whenever they are built, but it seemed like they were probably going to hand over that development to a regular development company at some point. We made our points. We talked about protecting the marsh. They were saying, well, we thought we might be able to do some good things, beneficial things with the marsh, but they weren't adequately explaining it, and we certainly couldn't see the marsh. So we, there's a lot of concern. So we keep working on issues like that. We just keep step by step moving, what we can along, and we're going to go with the flow here. And that's kind of the way it goes on a lot of projects. So that's about it.
Great, thank you, Eileen. I think that our presenters for the third case study, which is tonight, are involved in a pretty important meeting right now. They're going to join us a little bit later. And so we're going to take a look at one of our webinar videos from May. And the speaker is Marilyn Latta, and it's on eelgrass and oyster beds. And remember, eelgrass is real important many places in the Bay.
Conservancy. Welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being part of this session and everyone's work to put it together. So I'm really glad to now take us into the submerged habitats of the Bay. And I think it's a really nice transition to the talks that Roger and Letitia and have given. So we'll talk a little bit about the value of Olympia oyster beds and eelgrass meadows and the ways that we're linking these habitats to beaches and tidal marshes so that we can learn, what tools in the toolbox can we use to build capacity to adapt. I think you've already seen these pictures comparing our hardened gray traditional shoreline approaches, which can damage habitat and really cut off both people and, our critters in the bay from the shoreline edge. And so the value of nature-based infrastructure is really looking at these biological and physical benefits, thinking about how we can better connect our habitat types and how we can use them to build this green infrastructure. And this term living shorelines has been used quite a bit. It really just means utilizing nature to achieve both physical shoreline protection goals as well as create biological benefits for habitats and the species that we've been talking about. And it can play out in many different ways, as we've been hearing from the speakers. Certainly we all love tidal marshes, myself included, but I'm really sort of happy to talk about some of the more underrepresented habitat types that maybe don't get as much attention. Olympia oysters are there on the top left. These are a species of shellfish that are native from Chile to Alaska. And we're lucky enough to have them in the bay, both historically and currently. And so I'll talk about some reef projects that we're designing to enhance oyster habitat. And then there's many other species, including eelgrass, which is a submerged flowering plant in the bay. Both of these species mostly exist below that low tide line, so we don't often get a chance to see them, which is why I wanted to include a lot of pictures for people to be able to actually see these habitat types. We have a lot of species of seaweeds, macroalgae, sand beaches, and that sand is both in the intertidal in the areas that Roger was showing and also lining the bottom of the bay in many locations, as well as rock and mud flats. And so we're thinking about how we can incorporate each of these into designs moving forward. And I really want to give a shout out, a lot of this Living Shorelines work has been occurring over the last decade or two on the East and Gulf Coast. And these projects have provided fantastic models for us on the West Coast. Many of them are a bit different. They have a different species of oyster. Their cordgrass is not our cordgrass. And so we really do need to look at particular location considerations and species considerations. A lot of these projects are built on private shorelines, so just individual homeowners that might have 10 feet or 100 feet of shoreline in front of their house. And so the projects are small. And with their lower tide range of 1 to 3 feet compared to the West Coast, which has a 5 to 8 foot tidal range, a lot of these projects are pretty accessible. They're tucked up high on the shoreline next to those houses and the shoreline edge. Whereas many of our projects, we're constructing features that sometimes are a couple hundred meters offshore. So there are differences, but there are still a lot of valuable resources that we can learn from, especially from areas like the state of Maryland, which was very progressive in 2008 in establishing their Living Shorelines Protection Act. They actually require that homeowners prove that a living shoreline wouldn't work before they're allowed to install a bulkhead or a seawall. And that can be done, there are waivers, but it's an excellent step to encourage that thinking process and look at what are the options besides just defaulting to rock. And many states, North Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, many others have developed pretty progressive programmatic permit mechanisms so that the local, state, and federal agencies are working together to create incentives. And the pictures on the bottom show that there's a lot of great public involvement that can occur. Some of this is challenging for us out here, again, with that larger tide exchange and cold waters and currents. We can't always be out in shorts, standing in the water doing these things, but there's still some opportunities to get involved. And there's just briefly too, to talk about the resources that exist for folks. There is a new, well, not new now, it's been several years, that the Army Corps developed a nationwide permit 54 for living shorelines. It needs to be modified a bit for our larger systems out here, but it's a great example of federal support. And in California, there are many actions that our Natural Resources Agency and others have taken. There's an executive order to prioritize natural infrastructure solutions and a lot of efforts to create integrated programs so that we're looking at climate adaptation as well as habitat protection at the same time. I love this picture on the bottom. We had a biological illustrator develop this as part of the Subtitle Habitat Goals report. Sorry, the screen is so small, but on the left, that's our foundational document. It's modeled after the Baylands report that we've been talking about. It came out in 2010, and it focuses on a 50-year conservation plan for these submerged areas in the bay. And it's really been sort of the guide to our actions to link these demonstration projects and science to the management recommendations. And then there's also some excellent case study examples. The National Wildlife Federation put out this Natural Defenses in Action report, which I highly recommend taking a look at. 10 different case studies around the country, everything from the Mississippi River Delta to open coastal systems. And then other journals, which are highlighting the use of oyster reef and other types of restoration. So we've seen this picture a lot. Again, I just want to highlight, I think, Roger, we need to get the beaches into this picture. We don't have every habitat type represented, but I'll focus a bit on this lower edge with oysters and eelgrass and the work that we're doing to sort of integrate with the other tidal marsh work that's occurring in the bay. And also, this is very small, but I wanted to highlight that there's a great federal state partnership, which is led by NOAA and the Army Corps of Engineers and many others, that has a lot of great resources to provide information to describe what we're talking about. Their SAGE program is an acronym to really highlight this green-gray spectrum that we're talking about. I don't know if you can see it, but on the far left are fully green examples where you might use only native plantings or vegetative material to achieve shoreline protection and habitat. On the far right is a fully gray example, like a seawall, riprap, levees, bulkheads, etc. But there are a lot of combinations in between, and most sites may not be perfectly suited to a fully green or a fully gray situation, and we may need to look at these combinations that Letitia and Robin and others were referring to. A levee in combination with a lowered seawall, or placement of oyster reefs in front of a marsh that can work together in combination to achieve multiple benefits. And we've talked a lot about these co-benefits. I just want to highlight that many of these also apply to the submerged habitats. They're different species than the songbirds or tidal marsh species that we've been talking about. They can benefit things like salmon and steelhead, Pacific herring, Dungeness crab, a lot of the invertebrates and the critters that are really forming the base of the food chain in the bay that then benefit the birds and marine mammals and species that we're more familiar with. They can also attenuate wave energy, although at certain tides. So obviously, we can't create structures that are 20 feet tall in the shallow subtidal, but we can have a good effect on wave energy at certain parts of that tide cycle. So in combination with other techniques and methods, this can really add up. We can help to accrete sediment, reduce erosion, even provide for outdoor recreation with kayaking and other types of fishing and other opportunities out there. Eelgrass beds have a lot of potential to sequester carbon, and there's a lot of work being done to look at that. We know worldwide, large beds that are persistent have the ability to sequester as much as redwood forests. So there's great potential there. We're still gathering enough data on our local eelgrass beds to really define how much they could sequester, but this is a very promising area of study. And you may have seen some recent news articles about Melissa Ward and Ariana Rickert's recent work from Bodega Marine Lab, which looked at the relationship between placing eelgrass plantings near to oyster reefs and the great role that eelgrass can play in buffering ocean acidification. They can absorb carbon dioxide and therefore reduce pH, or reduce acidification rather. And so that can help with strengthening the whole system if we put these things in combination.
There was increasing alarm at the CIA.
A little lag with my slides. I did want to highlight, what many of us have been saying, that one size does not fit all. We can't put an oyster reef everywhere. We can't put a beach everywhere. It's important to look at the historical context and also the particular conditions, the soil type and substrate. Is it cobble? Is it soft sand? Are there potential for vegetative habitats like eelgrass? What is the shoreline type and that slope? How exposed is it to wave energy? What is the adjacent infrastructure? Can we test something without too much risk with the built environment nearby, or is there high risk? And so therefore we need to go to more tried and true techniques before we learn more. And then it's also really critical to look at local support. We've talked a lot about the permitting, which is a necessary and important function to make sure that these projects don't cause more harm than benefit. But we're really happy to see, Dave mentioned the BRIT and various efforts that are occurring to help streamline and make more collaborative and efficient the permitting process between agencies. And community engagement is a huge piece of this as well. If we're, especially in the subtitle, if we're just constructing projects that nobody ever sees, they don't know they're there, they don't really know the benefits of them, that's not going to be as valuable as if we're engaging graduate students, engaging volunteers, making community presentations, engaging conservation corps and others, so that it really does have a community connection to the work. And there are a lot of site-specific considerations. I just wanted to show this map on the bottom right, which gives us just a brief snapshot of this public-private ownership in San Francisco Bay. A lot of people are surprised to learn that the Bay Bottom is not fully publicly owned. Agencies like the State Lands Commission and others certainly do have public ownership of many parcels, which we can see in those green areas. But the red areas are all private. And a lot of these were, mapped out and sold off as, with plans of future development and then weren't developed, but they're still privately held. And so these are opportunities to create public-private partnerships and work with both agencies and landowners to revisualize what we can do with those submerged lands. The bathymetry is important, depth is important. It matters whether you have to walk out 10 feet or 1,000 feet or 1,000 meters, whether you need to bring a barge into 10 feet of water or 1 foot of water. These really have real world operational impacts on the type of projects that can be done. And I've talked a lot about just the shoreline orientation, especially to wind and wave energy. And how important it is to really respect and think about the habitats that are already there and that we don't impact them by trying to improve things. I don't know how well everyone can see it, but that map of the bay in the top sort of shows the depths. So the gray are areas that are less than 10 feet, which is much of San Francisco Bay, quite shallow. The middle gray is 10 to 30 feet. And then that darker black is greater than 30 feet. So it really is just those ancient river channels and our shipping, dredged areas that are deeper. And we've got a lot of shallow area to work with. But it does require physical space as well. So that's why, the amount of horizontal and vertical space are critical to look at. So we have our most recent project is our Giant Marsh Living Shorelines project at Point Pinole. Very excited about this work. And, I have a great acknowledgement slide at the end, but certainly want to acknowledge that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, even though we're in the soft mud out here. There are many dozens of partners, from funders to regulators to the scientists on our team, consultants who are working together to develop these designs. So this project, we've got oyster reefs offshore. There are actually 3 different sets of reefs. Each one is combined with a different vegetative plant species. So we have oyster and eelgrass combinations. We have oyster reef and Pacific rockweed combinations, which is an intertidal seaweed. And then we have near to shore cordgrass and oyster combinations, so that we can really look at how well do oyster reefs placed directly adjacent to the shore edge help to protect and benefit Pacific cordgrass, which is a really important low marsh species. And I talked a bit about these partnerships. These are just some of the pictures of the folks on this team. You know, many hands make light work. I would certainly not say any of this work is easy, but many hands and many partners make the work happen and make the work more fun and valuable. I mentioned graduate students. Kathy Boyer from San Francisco State is our lead scientist. She and Chayla Zabin from the Smithsonian Institution, Ted Groschholtz from UC Davis, Susan De La Cruz from USGS, many others are working together to have both consultants as well as graduate students and others participate in the projects. And we're putting a lot of effort into setting up experimental designs that are science-based. So the monitoring is the largest cost with these projects. We really are, for the first time, developing these efforts and wanting to show proof of concept. So we've got to have a clear understanding of what are the benefits, exactly which species are showing improvements, are we seeing any impacts, and how does that change seasonally? So the data is really helping us to refine the designs for each next project that we then construct. And I just have a few more pictures that I really want to walk through. I want to highlight the fact that these projects provide huge opportunities for green jobs and job training. I mentioned conservation corps. We've worked with the North Bay Conservation Corps and Civicor in Oakland, who both help to construct oyster reef elements, which we make out of a small percentage of concrete mixed with native sand that's mined from the bay and native oyster shell that Roger showed. In his application, it was placed for beach restoration. In this application, it's actually mixed into what we call baycrete, which we then form into these different shapes and sizes so that we can test what works best for oyster reef construction. And then you can see some pictures down there of SF State students and graduate students, preparing eelgrass, which we typically collect from donor sites and then place out at the restoration site so that it can expand. There's also, a lot of opportunity for large scale construction job opportunities. We've used clean Pacific oyster half shell from entities like Drake's Bay Oyster Company. That semi-truck, we had 6 semi-trucks full of oyster shell for our first project in San Rafael, about an acre of treatments. And that's been really valuable in testing the use of clean oyster half shell compared to this baycrete that we're using. So you can see just a couple of pictures of what it looks like, placing reefs at both high and low tide. You can see how shallow the water is with workers standing in the shallow water to help guide the placement. All of this takes really careful permitting so that we make sure not to impact, the resident species. And so I just put up the logos of our 6 main state and federal permitting agencies: Army Corps, NOAA Fisheries, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bay Conservation and Development Commission, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the state water boards. And we're really happy with the formation of the Regional Regulatory Integration Team, which is developing processes so that they can better coordinate together, they're co-housed together in non-pandemic times, and they can really address any conflicts between their mandates in a more efficient way. And so this is in process. And I'll just finish up. I've talked about the intensive monitoring, but these are some of the examples of what we're looking at, not only the oyster and eelgrass success, but invertebrates and bird use of the reef, fish use of the reefs, and also all of the physical attributes, how well they're breaking down waves, secreting sediment, water quality measurements, etc. And I think I have one last slide, and then acknowledgements. We've had over 100 species settle at our San Rafael site. At the more recent Giant Marsh site, we have an estimate of over 400,000 oysters as of year 2, and that's a low estimate. We're seeing these reef structures reduce wave energy by about 30% at certain tides. And we're also informing additional pilot projects in California. So this just gives you a good sense of how it's spreading. And we're so happy that others are demonstrating these techniques. There are a lot of barriers to innovation. We've been talking about that. I think you've been talking about that during this webinar series. We do need a broader context to think regionally and really stand up to institutional inertia and be willing to discuss and pilot new ideas. And make sure it's feasible. We can't necessarily put wetlands off Manhattan, but we can think about what might be appropriate there. And I last just want to thank, well, sorry, I had one more slide. This is a great image showing our science lead kayaking over reef structures. And so really designing for the future to think about what types of techniques we might incorporate. And I think we're now on the last slide of just thanking all the partners. So we really couldn't do it alone. It really requires a big mix of engineers, scientists, funders, and agencies to support this. Thank you so much.
All right. So I was expecting that Myrna and the other speaker would have joined by now. So was there a question or no? Was that just a thumbs up? I think that was just a thumbs up.
Just a thumbs up.
Good. All right. So I just texted Myrna, but I haven't heard back from her. So I would suggest maybe we start another video and then we can just cut it short when she joins. And I was going to suggest, I don't know if Lydia can find a Patty Okawa video on carbon sequestration in wetlands.
I will look for it right now. I should be able to pull it up.
Sorry, give her a few minutes because she wasn't expecting this. I was. Oh, I just heard back from Myrna. She's having, she wanted us to go ahead and play her recorded presentation. And then she's going to come on for questions and answers. She's having some technical difficulties getting online. So I'm not sure where her recorded presentation is.
I think I can pull it. Yeah, I think I can pull it up.
Thank you, Lydia.
Let me take a look. All right.
Hello, I'm Myrna Hayes. I'm Myrna of Mare Island, the Restoration Advisory Board Community Co-Chair for the last 27 years. I'm the co-founder of the Mare Island Shoreline Heritage Preserve, and I was the volunteer preserve manager from the founding in 2007 with our first two events through 2019. I'm the president of the Mare Island Heritage Trust, and I represent the Redwood chapter on the Sierra Club's 3-chapter sea level rise committee. I'm happy to speak with you about Mare Island and some of the opportunities that I feel we have to engage in a public process to protect natural and historic resources on the island. I came to Mare Island 27 years ago and I fell in love. Mare Island of my dreams. This is a story of how a small peninsula, once an island surrounded by thousands of acres of swamplands, has managed to consume most of my adult life. And I hope to inspire you to find Mare Island weaving its way into your own dreams. Mare Island Shoreline Heritage Preserve. Let's start there. Where is it? What is it? And what's at stake also island-wide? The preserve is a place of peace and solitude that's a mix of history, nature, scenic vistas adjacent to this growing development pressures on Mare Island, a former naval base since 1854. And currently the master developer is making the plans for a new updated specific plan for the entire island. Also on the island there, we feel there's an opportunity to expand the preserve into a network of wildlands on the west and the east of the island. So what the developer is faced with is convert or construct, convert historic buildings like this one, the largest on the island, 2 football fields in length, 5.32 acres, or construct new, and the balance that goes with that. And what we're looking at is how will natural resource, all the resources protection fit into those plans? And then how do we convey our values? How do we become a part of the process? One of the unusual things about this specific plan, as I talk with people from throughout the Bay, is that the plan update is being created by the master developer. So we want to be concerned with always that balance between, or the eloquent solution that can come out of working together to protect the resources that are important to us while weaving in the concerns that the developer will have in terms of the greater economics. So where's Mare Island? It's what I call on the north shore of San Francisco Bay. The largest bay of the estuary is San Pablo Bay, and it juts out as now a peninsula from the San Pablo Bay lands, diked and drained areas along the northern perimeter of the San Pablo Bay, and then sweeps around along the western shore of Mare Island. I feel like it's, as you look at it from this perspective, it's a linchpin for a regional response to both sea level rise adaptation, we'll talk about a little bit later, and also kind of a retreat and haven for wildlife responding to climate change in the Sonoma and Napa valleys that you can see to the north in that image. Mare Island Preserve is situated at the mouth of the Napa River, and it's on the original Mare Island. You can see it as a hillock at the very right center of this very old image. And that's prior to the Navy filling for 150 years the island, the rest of the island, and quite significantly changing it. In this image, you see the Carquinez Strait, you see the city of Vallejo to the left and San Pablo Bay to the right. Next slide here is a photo taken by the Navy in 1942, and it shows the preserve here at the end of the island on this high spot, almost 300 feet elevation, and then looking to the north. This is an image that one of our board members drew, and it shows you the many features of the Mare Island Preserve, from the historic gardens and orchard site, the former naval ammunition workers' homes, our visitor center near the right-hand side, near the top, the oldest bay model on the bay, predating Sausalito, and built in 1927. And it also shows you how we surround the golf course like a horseshoe. And that golf course is owned by the developers and not planned to be retained as a golf course. They've abandoned that use 2 years ago when they purchased it. So what's unique about the preserve in terms of the context of the region? It's the only open space park managed as a wildlands park in the town of Vallejo. Solano County is the only Bay Area county with no open space district. It has no national park, unusual for the Bay, and only one state park, which is a recreation area past the bridges there, and also the former state capital in Benicia. So we play an important role in providing a place of peace and opportunity to get out into the wilds of nature. We started the park as a little by little park. This is Poco, by the way, my little dog mascot there, not mine, my friends. When the city of Vallejo was dipping into bankruptcy for the first time in 2008, they couldn't open the preserve, and that was following pressure from the public to open it after the city had entertained Bechtel and Shell to build a liquefied natural gas tanker terminal and 1,500 megawatt power plant on the property. So as I say, little by little, we've created a magical place that was already magic, but we've enhanced it. In 2008, we founded as a nonprofit operated park because there wasn't a regional park system and there wasn't a community park designation on the property. We founded the Mare Island Shoreline Heritage Preserve. It's never been designated as a park by the city, and that might be something you want to ask the city council to do. And most of the city's community parks are managed by a separate recreation district. So our purpose was to create a park that was nature and cultural history, wildlands based, and that it would be open to the public at no cost, and that what we have created is a tremendous community based on that, on those focuses. There are plenty of scenic vistas with 7 county panoramic views. There are a lot of odd structures, from bunkers to these structures that we're not sure sometimes what they were even used for. Industrial remnants. The Mare Island Shoreline Heritage Preserve, as the task force report to the council in 2003 through 7 recommended the name be, was founded and operated for 12 years. Primarily by volunteers with no financial support from the city of Vallejo. And without an agreement in place with the city, we never could raise the funds that you might expect would be available from government and private sources. So that has been a challenge in the operation of the property. The preserve is located on the former Naval Ammunition Depot. These buildings were either built on the shore and are going to be subject to sea level rise and king tides, I might note. And they were built into the bluffs to be protective in case of an explosion, that it wouldn't be able to go very far, go up instead of out. These are the oldest ammunition storage buildings on the island. They're listed on the National Register of Historic Places with the houses and with the cemetery. The houses being just housing for essential personnel, and there were about seven residences still. And those are intended to be in the preserve. The ammunition buildings themselves are solid, but they're not suitable for modern building use, and they'd be very expensive to convert. Jumping over to the northwest of the preserve, we also manage the day-to-day management of the trail called the San Pablo Bay Trail. That goes along the levee tops on the western side of the island. The preserve turned 13 in April, and of course, the little bit older picture of all of us is maybe the 6th anniversary, and those donation barrels were what ensured that the public could visit this property and use it for free if they had to. We certainly do a lot of guided tours, and we'll be doing one on Saturday as part of this class, focused a lot on bird watching, but also exploring the historic areas. Sorry about that. One of the later things that we added to the preserve just 2 years before we were forced to close by the city were these yurts. And we had 2 yurts and tent camping. And that was, as most parks in the region know, is a major source of operating money. for the park. We have a lot of really amazing natural resources, including a great blue heron rookery, lightning rods, which are we found virtually every bird that has ever visited the preserve was at one point or another perched on these lightning rods. And then osprey came to the bay via the Mare Island Preserve, and this is actually the only nest on a tree in the Bay Area, and this is a dead palm tree. Wow, I don't know why I keep going backwards. Oh, the inside of our visitor center. And here's our kitty on a 2,000-pound armor piercing ammunition item. One of the things built at the ammunition depot, and we do a lot of education about protecting, being safe in ammunition areas. We just allow the public to use the property for whatever makes their heart sing. We just have a wedding anniversary this weekend, a bride and groom who used our visitor center as a Halloween themed wedding. We rent bicycles or let people use bicycles that have been donated to us. Lots of fun things for kids to do. And including Boy Scout jamborees, classrooms like the one on the left who wanted to see if they could all fit in the yurt. And of course, magnificent vistas, sunrises, Mount Diablo in the background. Then what happened one day into September of 19, 2 years ago, the Mare Island Heritage Trust was dismissed as managers of the preserve, and the city reopened it in 2020 as under the auspices of the Public Works Department, which, as you can imagine, isn't necessarily good for a nature preserve. So what went wrong? How on earth could we lose our nature preserve? The new city manager set out to destroy our Wildlands Community Gathering Park. He didn't like that we drew the public and drew them in and gave them more of an experience of community gathering even than just parkland. He wanted it downgraded to a jogging trail only and us removed as managers. So what went wrong? The power of staff. Here I am to tell you, to wreck an open space. It's not just your city council du jour. The city council sets policy. If they didn't set a whole lot of policy for the preserve, or the council changed over time, we saw that at Point Melody, a lot of different proposals for the property. Then staff goes out and very broadly operates implements the council's policy, or in the absence of the policy, a city manager can be quite powerful. So in 19, after he had hired a new fire chief, 4 days on the job, he drove through our park and he stopped and he said, things are going to change around here. Rich people are buying this island and they don't like the way you run this park. And suddenly we were in save the preserve mode, which we'd never had to be because we didn't have to buy the property. We didn't have to build a constituency around protecting it. It was a foregone conclusion. And so this was shocking. So where do we go from here? And we're looking for your thoughts. So there was a mistake made by the city manager. How can we correct it? How can we bring it back with our visitor center reopened and all of our outings and activities, events? How can we upgrade it again from more than a jogging trail? One thing would be to not have the Public Works Department in charge. That's just not sustainable for the natural and historic resources, and it doesn't really isn't sustainable at the city level in terms of costs. Just makes sense to partner with the nonprofit land trust again. So why is it important that we return soon? Our land trust founded and funded the preserve for 12 years. We've been out for 2. We need to get back in and start making the resource and the community top priority rather than just fire prevention or ease of operation. We, like nobody else, understand the complexity of the resource, and we have a proven management model. The public wants us to. We have almost 8,700 signatures, which will encourage you to go sign on mareislandpreserve.com, and another 1,000 on paper, and we're ready to go to work. The Public Works Department is just not suited for long-term management of natural and historic resources, as I just said. This is some of my key volunteer staff a year ago when we were first allowed back into the preserve, and it looks pretty darn bleak to us. So we say 2 things that you can do right off: sign our petition, share it. Don't give money to change.org. They made $4,500 off of us because people read the way they write the fundraiser at the end, and they think that the money goes to us. And then write to the mayor and city council and take that same letter and send it to the news outlets. And even as I note here, you could engage your own Sierra Club group and chapter in making this property top priority for them. And we're very happy that we have received tremendous support from our chapter and our group, and we'll be telling you more about that at another time. I will say that the preserve estate lands granted land, and so the city should be managing it for the enjoyment of all Californians. And you might want to drop a letter off to the State Lands Commission and talk about your concerns about the resources, the California resources that may not be being protected as well as they were when we were managing. So our mayor is a longtime ally, but he's a minority. We need one more council member, so you could help us work on getting a good council member elected that would be who would be supportive of us in the November 22 election. You know, you can take the long view as well as the nearer view. Here's just a sample of what I might suggest you write to the council. We're not talking about trying to convert the land use or to go through a public process. That's actually already been accomplished in 2007-8. And so we're really just talking about the click of a switch. And that would just be the council returning to their earlier commitment. They were at one time a 7-0 majority in support of funding things in our preserve, and just going back to that way of life, you might say. So what else could you do? I'm talking a lot about things you could do, we could do, because I want to use Mare Island as an illustration of how in this presentation, you're seeing a lot of things about what could you do? Why is it important? I want you to take this presentation and think about your own situations, your own properties that mean a lot to you. So I'm not just saying that you orient yourselves to Mare Island, but I am using these as illustrations of what else you could do on a site that matters to you. So leveraging donations, making matches, which you see a lot with land trusts. You could make a donation from a donor advised fund or an IRA. We've had people do both. We had one hiking guide who challenged his hiking group. We ended up with $2,500 from that one hiking group. And we received like $2,000 from a woman who was at a date, an age where she needed to offload that money out of her IRA. And of course, personal funds too. All can be given either by check or mareislandpreserve.com. We have a donation button there. And then ask others to join you. That's simple, especially like on the petition. Just sending it out as an opportunity to sign, and also, you know, you could ask others, you know, to support our efforts. One of the reasons we're asking for money right now is, of course, it will take effort to hire a consultant, let's say, to help us, or a lawyer to help us get back on the scene. But it also just, it costs money when you're suddenly your source of income is gone as a nonprofit and you need to cultivate other sources that just keep the lights on. And also one thing that would be helpful is if you see something about a source of unrestricted funds, drop us a line, let me know. Okay, so let's go next to, we've covered the preserve and what you could do to help us get back on the property and be protective of it. Now let's go to the specific plan update process that is underway right now with the authors, the primary update team being from the master developer themselves, not the city. So the master developer Nimitz Group, Southern Land Company, bought the land about a year and a half ago, bought the the land that's within the existing master development rights. And they are now underway in developing an update to the specific plan for Mare Island. This is my recommendation to you. Tell them how important the protection and expansion of the preserve is to you and the local and regional community. You can write the same message to the letter to the editor and to the mayor and council. The reason I say write to the developer right now is because this is before the specific plan is released, and maybe you can influence what the outcome of the specific plan is before it gets released. So at a minimum, you would want the current open space retained and protected in the update. That includes the former golf course, which we've heard that they are planning housing on. And that's what we look down on that 7-county panoramic view at the top of that 300 foot above the bay. So it's going to be definitely to our advantage to have it a more open space feel than housing that we can view. If they wanted to hide housing somewhere, that might work. But let's go for at least at a minimum keeping the open space that we already have, and that includes the really vast marshes on the west and on the Napa River's edge, and the opportunities on the Napa River side, especially to implement sea level rise adaptation. And then the third thing that I want to really stress in this slide is to urge them to limit plans for trails in and adjacent to marshes, levee tops, on Napa River edge, on the bay and the river's edge, just to keep these bands open for wildlife corridors and for wilderness. We don't need to go all over 5,000 acres mucking it up with trails. Let's keep them tight, we have plenty of vistas, plenty of shoreline, but let's move them in off of the river itself and the bay itself. You can help to organize and lead hikes and to bring gatherings together of people, because we're really behind the 8 ball here. Our community doesn't seem to engage all that well, partly because maybe some of us aren't doing a good enough job. I don't know. Educate and inform the public about the specific plan process, and that might be something where you're learning more and more through this class. Engage people who do care about these multiple issues, as Sierra Club has crafted messages at the state and local level, national level, but bring your own flavor to it and to this specific site. Open space, nature, history, climate change, sea level rise, how that can all be packaged in a sustainable specific plan. And this is all really before you get to the plan review, and then you hope that the plan reflects your concerns. If it doesn't, then it's going to be the next step to engage in the specific plan process as it comes to the public. In the next couple of minutes, just let me finish up talking about sea level rise adaptation. You can see this is just an excerpt from the Atlas, the San Francisco Bay Shoreline Adaptation Atlas. It would be great to ground truth the atlas. It was, and send the authors any refinements that we see would be useful for Mare Island. And also it'd be so helpful for us to get up to speed on the atlas, get up to speed on sea level rise adaptation strategies, and how, what implications those could have, again, in the Mare Island specific plan. So I want to thank Eileen McLaughlin for putting together these next few slides that just are going to show you the Mare Island in the bigger Bay Area on the North Shore of San Francisco, or San Pablo Bay, again, the largest bay in the estuary. And then you can see the whole San Pablo Bay lands, the areas to the north of the bay. One thing that's interesting is because of the gold rush, the San Pablo Bay in general does not have any development close to its shore. It's filled up with the silt from the gold rush. So here we go a slide that Eileen prepared again, Mare Island and its preserve. So a few things: it faces the current driven by the Pacific Ocean coming from the west or from the left, and it adjoins the mouth of the Napa River. You can see it coming down between the island and the town, and its north edge is the mouth. It is the north edge of the mouth of the Carquinez Strait, which is right there below the circle, below the preserve. Now, 40% of California's water flows through the Carquinez Strait and into the bay right there. And then again, you can see with the circle, the preserve is right there at the southern end. I had the earlier image that was the small carve out here on the right hand side, but this is the San Francisco Bay Shoreline Adaptation Atlas, the Napa Sonoma area portion, and the Mare Island area is featured here. This is a nature-based adaptation strategies map, and it's going to be color coded here. And again, I'm talking about the potential for ground truthing Mare Island, you know, going out in the field and documenting whether the recommendations would work, and updating it if necessary, sending recommendations. This is part of the adaptation opportunities that have been identified for Mare Island, areas where you might improve the diked and drained areas of adjacent to the shore, and also where you might provide for migration space, again, in high tide events, or, you know, escape routes for wildlife that are dependent on the shoreline and on the marshes. And the last thing I want to bring out is that there's also a regional impact that Mare Island could have if we can hang on to the open space and even enhance it through some of those adaptation measures. And that is that there's already modeling that shows climate change impacts in the upper reaches of the Sonoma County and Napa County in particular. The valleys, the further you go north, the hotter they're going to become, and the more important it's going to be to provide for migration corridors to the cooler open space areas. And Mare Island is a retreat from the heat, you might say, but only with wildlife corridors. We had our first deer appear this spring in 50 years in the Mare Island Preserve. And that's partly, when we talk to the fish and game wardens, is because of the levee top access that they have along the shore and into the preserve itself. So Mare Island open spaces, I can't stress enough, must be protected for wildlife first. And that's why I only had the preserve open 3 days a week. That's why we only have one trail to the shore, because we're trying to give wildlife some breathing room. And so one of the biggest concerns I have about this issue, and I think you could embrace it if you like, is that there really is no organization currently working on these issues for Mare Island. And again, incorporating that priority in the specific plan seems like a no-brainer to me. So finally, and on my last slide, I want to encourage you to stay vigilant, whatever task it is that you set yourselves up to do. Don't give up. Someone recently asked me what my middle initial was. I said L for Louise. She said, I thought it would be P for perseverant. Then also to keep your hopes up. Don't ever give up hope. You can for a day or a few, maybe even a week, but just keep hope always present, always there. And then I like to also take advantage of, like on Facebook, to know when I see change, positive change. Imagine this, I came around the corner a couple of weeks ago around a traffic circle headed to the preserve, and there were 2 new wayfinding signs on the island. We had taken the place as top billing from the duct tape that had covered the golf course sign. So for the first time in 14 years, we made it not only onto the directional signs, but with top billing. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, and now I'm open to questions, and thank you again.
Well, Myrna is here. I think she was able to join at the beginning of that presentation. So if you have any questions for her, you can go ahead and ask them. There she is.
Hi.
Welcome.
I'm on my computer. What an upgrade, huh? Yep. A new SIM card for my Sprint account, and made it possible to get on with you all. So thank you so much. I'll listen for questions, or maybe someone could help me out if there are questions in the chat, or maybe I can hop over to those.
Hey, Myrna, I have a question. This is Jen Hetterly.
Hi, Jen.
I'm wondering about the specific plan process.
Yeah.
I understand that it's being prepared by the developers, but what are the prospects for transparency around that? Will that come before City Council? Will there be public workshops? Will there be any public engagement in that process?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Of course, it would have to come before the Planning Commission, I assume, and the council. It is, after all, a specific plan, and that's an embedded document in the general plan, right? But what's interesting to us, surprising to us, maybe shouldn't be surprising, if you look up Southern Land Company, they're out of Nashville, Tennessee. The Nashville that you might remember from visiting an auntie or seeing some movies or music is not the Nashville that Southern Land has in mind. And so I think they have a similar model in mind for Mare Island, a lot of high rise, a lot of glass, and not any involvement, if they can help it, from the community. They started after 18, I think it was 10 months or 12, I don't know, 13 months of not hearing from them at all. They started a monthly meeting with the public, but highly controlled. You know, you had to submit questions ahead of time. Just a few people were allowed to raise their hand at the beginning of the presentation. So we haven't seen any community engagement in this process to date. And the mayor, who is a friend, as I mentioned on the presentation, has, you know, written me a little email and said, you know, what ideas do you have for the specific plan? What are your concerns? So, you know, when the mayor picks up the phone, you're understanding that there's a little different process than he might even, you know, value going on. So we think they're just going to stealth and surprise.
So that might be another topic to raise in a letter to City Council, or to the, I guess, whatever department is managing it, saying, you know, we really need to engage, you really need to engage the community, get our input, give us a chance to react.
Yes, what a great idea. And, you know, we just learned yesterday, I think, that the City Council has voted unanimously to go back to in-person meetings at City Hall. so that's going to be a real boon. And you can still comment via Zoom or, but electronically, but you'll also be able to actually visit City Hall again. And those face-to-face interactions can help a lot. But yeah, what a great idea. Very obvious, but I wouldn't have thought of it. I just think that people think, or in other places, maybe you have 2 or 3 or 4 organizations and you can talk together and coalesce or found a study group, but we haven't been able to jumpstart that for some reason in this town. Partly because Mare Island is perceived as separate from the city, from the rest of the town, and insulated somewhat from it. And I think that a handful of people, just 300 homes who actually live there, well, we're not quite sure, where they are in the process as well. The developer's driving it. That's the point.
So there was a question in the chat about the location of the Great Blue Heron Rookery. Is that somewhere near there?
It is in the Mare Island Preserve. They have been recorded by the Napslana Audubon Society guides, record keepers for 30 or 40 years in the preserve. But they've moved around, and in the last 10 years, they've settled in on that Navy workers housing area with nests in Deodora cedars primarily. And then a great egret rookery has come in, and they're in the eucalyptus, just absolutely adjacent to the trail. Both of them can easily be seen. And we have 19 osprey nests in the Napa River and on Mare Island, many of them in the preserve, where just seasonally when they're present, you can just walk up and look down on them, which is unusual for osprey nests. And then you can also drive around. And we have an osprey festival in June, late June each year.
Cool. I think John had a question. Do you want to go ahead, John?
Hi there. I just have a quick question. You were talking about the management of the park right now by the Public Works Department, the
Yes.
preserve.
Yes.
Has there been any thought about maybe getting the East Bay Regional Parks folks involved in the management of this instead of the Public Works Department?
Well, we're outside of that's a great question. We're outside of the boundary of East Bay Parks, being Alameda and Contra Costa County. And again, I went pretty fast on at the beginning that we don't have an open space district. We don't have a county regional park
Right.
system.
Okay.
And that's the dream the city has. And Governor Brown actually signed the legislation to enable an open space district, but our weird county supervisors, not unlike other counties, everybody has their oddness, but they have set themselves up to be the directors of that open space district, so not very arm's length. And then that was to go to a vote of the people, and with COVID and disarray, it is not going to get on the out for the vote anytime soon. Now the neat thing is we do have such enthusiasm from so many professionals that we actually have on board on our team as advisors. 2 East Bay Parks managers, one the first female carpenter for East Bay Parks, Union Carpenter, and then she became the manager until she retired last year of the entire park system's asphalt paving program. So a pretty cool woman, and she and her friend Michael visit the preserve, ride the bikes a lot, go out and break into the golf course like we all do, and we surround the golf course like a horseshoe. So what a great question and suggestion. And right now we don't see a mechanism for East Bay Parks to say under contract even,
Right.
come out and take care of this property. So yeah, good question.
Thank
Maybe
you.
not gonna work for us. Yeah.
Hey, Martin, there was another question in the chat
Yes.
And it says, could you say more about the general plan and how that relates to the specific plan under development? Would the developers need to modify the general plan?
No, the general plan amazingly wasn't updated in Vallejo for 40 years. But we finished that up about 5 years ago. The specific plan is just a sub plan. At least the way I see it, maybe some of you know specific plans better than me, can explain. Eileen's got her hand up. But it's just a plan for the development of Mare Island, basically as a neighborhood. Yeah, Eileen, you have your question up, your hand up? Maybe
I did, but I wasn't on, yes, I did, Myrna, but I wasn't on that point.
Oh, okay.
I was going, and
But you could talk to us about specific plan for a minute.
Well, I think you've said it right. I mean, a specific plan is about a defined area that's within the jurisdiction of Vallejo. And so it's just defined to, this is how we want to develop this area. So that's the, but what I was following on what Jen was saying as far as needing to the public process or lack of, the problem that you're talking about. I'm also thinking, the specific plan is going to have to go through CEQA.
Yes.
Right?
It absolutely
Right.
will.
And so it's going to get to the point where first they'll put the NOP out, the notice preparation, and you write letters saying, make sure in your EIR that you analyze this and this and this and this and this. And while you're looking at that, it's because the specific plan, it includes the preserve, but it includes the whole island.
Right.
Given the wildlife that's involved, you have the rookeries in the preserve, documenting where all of these important wildlife locations are that would be sensitive to any disruption would be the kinds of things that you might want to be ready to put in there in the NOP and force them to pay attention to. This builder may not be familiar with going through California's environmental quality.
That is what we're learning, that it's ECDC's new to them, CEQA is new, but that doesn't mean they don't have the money to hire the very best, best in their terms, consultants.
Right. Well, that depends, but yeah, and best can be the ones that decide their way, not yours.
Yeah, right.
But the fact is, if they don't work with the laws of California and the federal laws that would apply, then if you've documented and are writing it in or prepared, getting yourself ready to be asking these questions and putting them on paper. And it's important to put them on paper when you get into the NOP, and then when they put out the EIR, when you respond to their questions, when you make comments about their analysis, that puts you in a position to be able to pursue, some one challenges, but one, bringing it to the attention of the permitters.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So there's a number of reasons to do that. So I'm just, in your case, I mean, I'm thinking the Audubon Society may be able to help you point out with certain things around the island that they might want to point out, but so it's just a lot of work, and given the number of people you have or lack of in, it may be something to start putting your minds to, because that will come at you. And then when you're when they do have public meetings, you'll have more questions to bring up. And, so that, the hydrology of certain places, the contamination that's possible from certain, the munition buildings or whatever. These are things that maybe something to start keeping track of.
There you go. Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I know you had your hand up actually for another topic, I think, huh?
That was what I was trying to say, was that was my thing. Did I take my hand down?
Not yet. Or maybe somebody else has their
I
hand.
will lower it there. Okay.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Thank you so much, Eileen, and thank you for the slides. They were.
There was a question in the chat about is the Audubon Society at all involved in trying to protect what you're protecting, or how, or if so, how are they involved?
Well, the Napa Solano Audubon Society is, it's a, it, it's difficult to engage. You know, I mean, you know this about all the organizations that you want to partner with. They'll get a new president, or they'll get a new outreach coordinator, and or there'll be a hiatus, or someone dies, and it just sometimes keeping those lines of communication open are difficult. We definitely have two former shipyard workers who've spent the last 50 years really monitoring the wildlife and keeping records for Audubon Canyon Ranch, and for the writing the breeding bird atlas, and we've been able to bring them a lot of information just by being on the land all the time. Like we found, we began finding the very first year we were there, we would go up in the winter time on the warm tarmac of the road and find, now I'm going to forget what's the bird with the red eyes, not a plover, well, you'll think of it maybe, but they did not know they were there, and we weren't ever sure whether they nested or not. But anyway, yes, to answer your question, Audubon Society should be brought in as a player. We just need someone to convene, I think, some of these sit down and think about our strategy kind of meetings.
So another question in the chat, Myrna, had to do with, is there pollution in the areas, or legacy pollutants or off-limit areas because of contamination?
This is amazing, but because the Navy, for the first time in 27.5 years, I am not at my Restoration Advisory Board meeting right now, which I am the community co-chair of for all that time. So we've spent about $1 billion, and because of a conflict, they moved their meeting by a month, and that conflicts with this presentation tonight, and we had to do it because of the case study, the walk on Saturday, right? But anyhow, we've spent about $1 billion on the environmental cleanup of Mare Island. And you know what's difficult about getting the public involved, the community involved in that cleanup, and some of us have been there from day one, a Benicia High School chemistry teacher and myself, for certain, and it is that the contaminants do not flow in mother's breast milk. So we don't have drinkable or potable water because it's salt water underlying the island. There's just the Navy's been very diligent and spent literally, as I say, close to $1 billion on the environmental cleanup. So there are large areas of the island that were actually never contaminated. The areas that were really, some of them a great challenge. And of course, there'll always be residual risk, slight risk of exposure to munitions. And so that's an area where we're really intrigued, and the state regulators are already talking about the possibility of using sea level, natural adaptation to maybe let Mother Nature bring in marshes to cover the potential risk of where munitions may still be, rather than bringing just dirt in to fill it and cover it and make it higher, just to bring the wetlands in, and they will do the same thing, but be very much more protective and maybe a lower cost. We don't even know about that. But so one illustration is that the Navy was going to rebuild a pier, and they had to go to BCDC for a permit, and BCDC proposed a 15-foot seawall right on the shore facing the Carquinez Strait that would have been in our preserve on the lower portion of it, the river portion. And that was just, no way was the Navy going to do that. They actually pulled the permit and chose not to do the rehab of that pier, rather than have that kind of draconian requirement by BCDC. So this gives you, just a sense, this was probably about 4 years ago, of the work that we need to do to start to weave in those other more natural based strategies for sea level rise adaptation.
So I noticed Eileen had her hand up, and I was.
Yeah, I do. I have something else that occurred to me. At the other end of the island, Myrna, is it adjoining the San Pablo Bay National Wildlife Refuge lands?
Yes, actually, one of the tracks, the Figueres tract, is on Mare Island, one of the oldest portions of the San Pablo Bay National Wildlife Refuge. We had expected to add about 670 acres of the island, some of its northern dredge ponds, and a building that would be the headquarters for the National Wildlife Refuge,
Right.
and add those open waters and tidal wetlands. You might remember a sudden infusion of money into Bear Island, budget 2.4 million. I went to, no one knows this, but I flew to DC. You were at the boot camp that I attended, learning how to influence our congressional delegations. And we got that money earmarked for that transfer and for the building renovation. That was the federal match to what I would bring as the private match. And the Department of Defense and Department of the Interior got into a tremendous war that overnight caused the Department of Interior to pull 66,000 acres of Fed-to-Fed transfer requests from the Department of Defense, pull their requests. So overnight, that money left Mare Island and went to Bear Island. But
I know you know the history on that particular thing. I was aware of that, but I was not as in detail as you. But that wasn't the point I was trying to raise here. If they have land on the island, if they're adjoining, this developer and what the developer plans to do that would be in that area would be of concern if they're going to impact refuge land. So I'm thinking if the Friends of the Refuge or, and or the manager, and they have Melissa Amato as the new manager for San Pablo Bay, that would be wanting to also, when we get into that, they get to that point, write letters of comment.
It certainly could be adjacent to it, and so is the Highway 37 project. So,
right.
To the extent that they that those projects will impact them or benefit them, that they'll definitely be brought in. I'm sure they will insert themselves, but.
And I know it's at the other end of the island from the preserve, but when you get into the specific plan, you're probably going to be wanting to fight the whole specific plan wherever you can find holes in it. And that's why I suggest you think about those kinds of relationships where they might help.
Well, and that's the wildlife corridors I'm talking about are coming right out of the National Wildlife Refuge and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Napa Sonoma Marshes area. So those are it's essential, that we connect with them, because
well, you might bring it up to them sooner than later. Say, did you know that this was going on? Keep your eyes open.
Good point. Excellent, Eileen. Good. Who else has something they want to ask or contribute, please?
Well, I think we're pretty much out of time. There was one question. Maybe we can do one other question, and then I just wanted to wrap up and talk about our next advocacy action. And so the last question is from Meg, and it has to do with. It sounds like there's some difference of opinion about what adaptation strategies should be used around Mare Island. So I'm not sure if that's the case or if we just want to fine tune things.
I would say fine tune. I'm just looking at that map really truly for the first time. I don't know everything about every place, people are studying and all of that, but the map just on the face looks like the atlas, it could use some refinement. And there again, that's just the opportunity for those who are interested to help us engage. I've learned much myself from participating in this education we're going through.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Myrna. You've put a
very
lot of work into this and so many years with your foundation. So I think the next ask is going to be on this case study, and it's going to be to write to the Vallejo City Council. So we've heard a lot of different things, a lot of different issues. So some things to think about is just to preserve open space for wildlife, to make sure that people have access. So to reinstate Mare Island Heritage Foundation. Am I saying that right?
Trust, yeah.
Okay, trust. Okay,
Yeah.
Mare Island Heritage Trust.
Yeah.
I knew that sounded wrong. As caretakers for that open space. Also, I think if we're talking to the city council, they need, you can say this, I don't know if they'll do it, but take back the specific plan process from the developer.
Yeah.
And also, as Jen stated before, is you really should be involving the community in this process.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So some things to think about. So you'll get an opportunity. We'll do a breakout session next class where you get a chance to kind of share what your thoughts are on that before. And then in the meantime, we'll get together all that contact information for you.
And I can also provide some other documents, that'll just be foundational documents. But I think the message is that from tonight's conversation is just to really hop on getting the public involved ahead of time, early and often in this specific plan process, and also then just doing what you can. It may be till November of 2022 before we, it may be the council election that really breaks open the preserve and returns it to us. But in the meantime, just any way you can think of to offer some friendly fire would be appreciated.
All right. Well, I hope you all have a good evening. Thank you for joining us again. Look forward to, so again, if you're not going on the outing, look for a Zoom link for following the stream on Saturday. So I look forward to that.
And there were a lot of chat, but I'm not sure, I didn't get to see any of them. So is there a way for me to respond to chat after this goes off or not?
You know what, I will get I'm recording it and I will get a file of chat. And so I can,
okay.
I think I can just send that to you. So.
Okay, good. Because
Okay.
I'd love to respond. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
All right. Thank you all.
Good night.
Have a good evening.
Mara.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.